Welcome to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. We provide fiction reviews for the lit curious reader because why not try a little bit of everything? Our scholarish approach and cozy book club atmosphere makes literature accessible to everyone, whether you're a casual reader or a devoted bookworm. Join us on our literary journey to explore all genres. Hello, and welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs. I'm Jennifer, and today Joey and I will be having an affair with Virginia Woolf and her short story, A Lady in the Looking Glass, a reflection. Joey, do you think we should start with a little bit of background information on Virginia Woolf, or should we dive right into the story? Because, wow, there is a lot to say about Virginia Woolf.
Yeah, there is a lot to say. If you would like to share more information, then by all means.
I always want to talk about Virginia Woolf and her life story and why we keep reading her. And so, if you will be so kind to allow me just to read a brief biography of her, just to cement us back into who she was and what significance she had in her community at the time. She was born on January 25th in 1882 in London, England. She is known as one of the most significant and influential modernist authors of the 20th century. So, yes, if you get around literary circles, you have definitely heard of Virginia Woolf. One of her trademarks are her experimental style and the insight she has into the human psyche. We definitely will be talking about that in this story. She was born into a very highly intellectual and connected family. Her dad was a historian and an author and a critic, and her mom was an artist and a philanthropist. She had three full siblings and many step brothers and sisters. I think she was well poised in addition to her innate natural talent. I think she was really poised very well in her social circles, and the people in which she attached herself to really let her very unique voice be heard. And her mom died in 1895 when Virginia was 13. She had a nervous breakdown as a result of the loss of her mother, and that recurring theme of mental illness and family instability followed Virginia throughout her writing career. She was part of the Bloomsbury Group, which I'm sure we'll talk about at another time. But I love what I know about the Bloomsbury Group is that they champion the idea of art for art's sake. These guys just love rolling around in all of these things. And Vanessa Bell, the sister of Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf's future husband, Leonard Woolf, and E.M. Forster, who we have talked about before. So a lot of these influences kind of circle around to each other. I just quickly want to cement us into where she was in her career when she wrote this story that we're reading today, The Lady in the Looking Glass, which was published in 1929. So at this point, she had already had some success in her writing career, writing Mrs. Dalloway, one of my personal favorites, in 1925, To the Lighthouse in 1927, Orlando, 1928, and A Room of One's Own, which is her series of lectures championing the rights of women to have creative space. And so we get the story, The Lady in the Looking Glass. So I will leave it there, Joey. Anything else that you would like to add to that quick summary?
No, I
Other
don't
than
think
how
this.
much you currently love her?
Well, that would be part of my initial impressions. But no, for background information, no.
So, without further ado, let's get to the summary of Virginia Woolf's short story, The Lady in the Looking Glass, a reflection. This story explores themes of identity, perception, and the elusive nature of truth. The narrative centers on Isabella Tyson, a wealthy woman who is unmarried, lives on her own. She is being observed in the story by an unnamed narrator. The story unfolds through the metaphor of a looking glass, also referred to as a mirror, which serves as a tool for both literal and figurative reflection. The narrator speculates about Isabella's life, imagining her as a woman of great depth, mystery, and emotional richness, shaped by her travels, her passionate relationships, and her varied experiences. As the narrator gazes into the mirror, they attempt to uncover the quote unquote truth of Isabella's character, but the reflection reveals only superficial details, her elegant possessions, and the orderly arrangement of her home. The story culminates in a moment of stark revelation when Isabella herself appears in the mirror. Contrary to the narrator's romanticized assumption, Isabella's reflection is empty and devoid of the imagined inner life, suggesting that her true self is either unknowable or entirely non existent. Woolf's story critiques the limitations of perception and the futility of trying to fully understand another person. Through its lyrical prose and introspective tone, The Lady in the Looking Glass underscores the divide between outward appearances and our inner reality, leaving readers to ponder the complexities of human identity. Joey, what was this story like for you?
Well, I had to say that's a good synopsis of what the story is. There's not a plot, obviously, but it's hard. You can't really summarize this story. You have to just read it. And while I was annotating it and putting it on my notes, I'm just highlighting the whole page, every page. I cannot do that. That's not how this process works. I can't say everything is important, but everything is important. Okay. Now that I have read To the Lighthouse and I'm a Virginia Woolf fan and I can become a part of the fan club, I think there's just like something about her writing that now works for me, having read To the Lighthouse. And I think To the Lighthouse is actually one of her later published that, well, not the latest thing, but it was after Mrs. Dalloway. Yes. Okay. It was in 1927 and Mrs. Dalloway is 1925. So maybe it was because I liked it a little bit better because she had more skilled of a writer, but I will mention Mrs. Dalloway in just one second. She does this really amazing thing where she can create an intimacy between the reader and the characters instantly. And I just reread Mrs. Dalloway, spoiler alert. I just went to a bookstore, which is typical of something I do on the weekend, and I saw a copy and I was like, damn, I just gotta get it. I gotta know if I like it now that I've read To the Lighthouse. So I reread it, and of course, I do actually love it now. So I don't have to say I hate Virginia Woolf anymore or that I don't get her. But anyway, I'm going to use one of the minor characters to talk about that. Her name is Miss Kilman, and she is Elizabeth's teacher, if you remember. She's really not a big character. She's not like Septimus, obviously. And she wears a Macintosh, which I was like, oh my God, is that who is wearing the Macintosh in Ulysses? Is this the secret? I don't remember when Ulysses was published, so it could be, and that would be my conspiracy. But anyway, you get such little information about Miss Kilman and Mrs. Dalloway, but you immediately understand her, and I think that's what you do with all these characters. Like you get to know them all so incredibly well that by the end of a brief scene between Miss Kilman and Elizabeth when they're out to tea, and it's just like a heartbreaking moment. And I know we're not here to talk about Mrs. Dalloway, obviously, but I'm using it as an example because a lot of people have read Mrs. Dalloway and love it. So if you know, you know what that scene is. As I've been reading more, because now I'm reading Jacob's Room, just going through her canon here. And especially in this story, where I'm like, I don't think I can explain why I love all of these things. Why am I highlighting everything? I don't know that I have the language to put it into, to articulate it. And it's because it's so poetic that it makes me think of Borges, where he's like, you don't have to be able to say why you like it necessarily. You just have to feel that it made an impact on you. And I think Virginia Woolf nails it every time. And I do want to just to wrap up my initial impression here, I want to give a comparison of an author that published something in 2024, just last year, that is trying, I think, is trying to do not what Virginia Woolf is trying to do, but is trying to incorporate poetic language into their writing and is not doing it successfully. So I'm gonna I'm dissing this author, and I will say who it is and what book I read it from. I'm not saying that they can't do it in the future, but they just did not do it this time. Okay, so this is from Lady Macbeth by Ava Reed, which is about Lady Macbeth. It does not follow her actual story, but you tell me, Jennifer, because you love Virginia Woolf. So let's see if you think she is trying to do this. So the excerpt I got was Banquo draws himself up, satisfied at his muteness. He thinks they have fought and he has landed the finishing blow. But this is why he is a tactician, not a strategist. He sees what is before his eyes and in his arm's reach. He has the nobleman's little power and not the emperor's total dominion. He believes the lampreys devour at his discretion, but in truth, they are just dull mouths and will eat anything their teeth can find. So I just feel like this isn't it. That's not as you're trying to be poetic, but it's not quite. And I don't know why I wanted to compare this, but to me, I was just like, I want to use this as an example of something that's not working.
Okay, Joey, I'm going to skip my initial impressions to respond to that.
No,
So
we could go back. You
no,
respond
no,
and then
no.
tell us
I
your impression.
no, I totally want to follow up on this because this is so provocative to me. So I agree that the passage you just read by another author is leaning towards the style of Virginia Woolf. It's like, let me show you these really interesting and also complicated words, a statistician, a tactician, a
Mhm.
lamprey. Like these are not words that typically are just rolling off my tongue in a daily conversation. But what she does do effectively, as you said, in sort of this, I'm going to say mimicry, you might have a different word for that, sort of like this homage to how Virginia Woolf wrote. In the story we read, this story, The Woman in the Looking Glass, Virginia Woolf talks about an octopus. She talks about a creature like an octopus. So the fact that both of these writers have tried to explain human behavior using animals and sea creatures, I thought was really interesting. But Virginia Woolf, oh my God, she just leaves us in the dust. And so I would love to read that passage because how did you do that? She actually used, instead of the octopus, she used the word cuttlefish. And I was like,
I was
I
about to
don't
say, I literally we read 2 different things then because I don't I read this so many times and I do not remember octopus like though.
Cuttlefish, yes. And I looked up cuttlefish because I was like, what is that? And it says it's similar to an octopus. It's in the same
Oh.
family. And the reason I said she's talking about an octopus is that she talks about it squirting something
Mhm.
into the atmosphere that was purple and clouding the scene. I was like, you know who does that in my world? Like a squid or an octopus. And I just thought that was just a really interesting thing. But Joey, I'm going to try to take us to that passage only to compare it with what you just read. She is looking into an empty room reflected in the looking glass. And she says, the quiet old country room with its rugs and stone chimney pieces, its sunken bookcases, and red and gold lacquer cabinets was full of such nocturnal creatures. They came pirouetting across the floor, stepping delicately with high lifted feet and spread tails, and pecking elusive beaks as if they had been cranes or flocks of elegant flamingos whose pink was faded, or peacocks whose trains were veiled with silver. And there were obscure flushes and darkenings too, as if a cuttlefish had suddenly suffused the air with purple, and the room had its passions and rages, and envies and sorrows coming over it and clouding it like a human being. Nothing stayed the same for 2 seconds together. And Joey, the reason I read that was, oh my gosh, there was so much going on in that one or two sentences that a different writer, even though mimicking and trying to emulate some of this, is just going to miss the mark. And
Mhm.
when we go back to your opening thoughts about Virginia Woolf, her writing, your newfound appreciation for her style, I'm like, yes, 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 Joey. So for me, my first introduction to Virginia Woolf was Mrs. Dalloway. I was in from word one. I am in with Virginia Woolf. If I were explaining her writing to someone else, I would have to say, if you don't like jumping around from thought to thought like a butterfly flitting through fields of flowers, and you don't like feeling that you can read someone's mind and you're going to be on this emotional roller coaster of all of these contrary thoughts. One minute you're in love, the next minute you hate them. Sometimes you understand what's going on, sometimes you think you're dying. Like all of these things happen in a paragraph in a Virginia Woolf story. And so I think for me, the most compelling thing for me is her stream of consciousness style. She jumps around a lot, but you can always follow a thread of what took her between one topic and another. And I just thought that was really beautiful. So, the passage you read about the other contemporary author, I was like, I see what you're trying to do, but I see the stitches in your story. And Virginia Woolf has no stitches. She just seamlessly blends without any artifice of artificial structure. It just is, and you believe her. And I just thought that was so beautiful. Right down to the title of the story. You're playing with us before we read anything, right? It's called A Lady in the Looking Glass, a Reflection. Okay, yeah, I see my physical reflection. Oh, you meant a psychological reflection. Oh, you meant a reflection, a recollection of a scene that you are recalling and telling us about. It's like all the meanings are right there, and we haven't even started the story. And I
Mhm.
just love the way in which she tees us up to bowl us over. And it's like, oh, right. Okay. Well, I'm going to let you savor the voyeurism of watching someone. She's like, I was like a naturalist hidden in the weeds, undercover, observing something I could not have seen had my presence been known. And I was like, isn't that like just item one? Isn't that interesting? You think that
Mhm.
people have two types of lives, one that's observed and one that happens behind without someone else's gaze. So I just thought that was really, really awesome, Joey. So I'm just going to tell you, I was blown away by the artistry, as I always am. Everything I've read from Virginia Woolf has been so beautifully done that, again, it's that challenge of like, Joey, find me a Virginia Woolf that I'm not gonna like. Like, it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist.
I have not
Even
read
her
all her stuff.
suicide note, Joey, even her suicide note is beautiful.
That's messed up.
It is messed up, but I'm like, oh, you're breaking
I
my
just
heart.
it's probably kinda long, I would imagine. I just like
Not as long as my talk about it. No, it's really, really beautiful. It's a letter she left for her husband. And
I
one of
feel
the
like I wanna read it, but that's so depressing at the
No,
same
we definitely
time.
will. But Joey, like the moment that stuck with me, that she was aware that she was going mad and mental illness had gotten its claws into her again. And she wrote something to the effect of, no two people could have been happier than you and me. And by the way, I'm going to kill myself now. She has this beautiful profoundness of, you and I were as happy as two people possibly could have been. You are this beautiful husband, but I'm out. And that is where she left the letter for her husband to find after she had walked into the river. And it was like, oh, she was true to her artistry and her love of language and her effective emotional gravity to the end. And it's like, well done, but did you have to?
Yeah, I guess I'll read it. I don't know. I feel like I have to be in the right headspace, especially because I know what the outcome was. But I just want to go back just briefly. When you're talking about when Virginia Woolf writes in stream of consciousness and how you were comparing it to sort of like a butterfly in a field of flowers, which is a very Virginia Woolf thing to say. Of course. But I do wanna say that I think there is a logic to the way that she's just jumping into different minds because those people usually, not maybe not always, because I have not read everything, but the stuff that I have read, typically it seems like those people enter the scene, become a part of whatever's going on in some way, whether they're walking past and observing, and that's how it jumps. So it's like there's a logic to it, so it's not kind of like you're in Mrs. Dalloway's head and then you're in Septimus's head, but they're not in the same area. Usually it's there's a connection to them physically, like there's an observation of one another. Which is interesting because then you have this idea of the lady in the looking glass and it's all about observing somebody else. So I could see where that is coming into play. But just to go back to how I feel like her writing is sort of like just reading a poem, not just as in like, I don't know, just reading a poem, like a negative thing, but it gives me the same experience. So like I was saying before, how it's sort of like I can't really articulate all of the things that I'm thinking, which really doesn't serve the purpose of this and a podcast episode about the writing. But I want to say that there's one line in here that I was trying to challenge myself, like, what the hell is she trying to say? Like, I like it, what she's saying. And I feel like on some level, I understand what she's saying, and we're meeting each other in the middle here, but I don't know that I could explain to somebody else. So I'm going to challenge you, Jennifer, if you can explain in words out loud, because I don't think I can, what she's talking about. Because to me, this is sort of like summarizing the experience of reading poetry. And that maybe that's my explanation, but I don't think that's sufficient. But anyway, the line in this, in the lady in the looking glasses, without making any thought precise, for she was one of those reticent people whose minds hold their thoughts enmeshed in clouds of silence. She was filled with thoughts. So, like, to me, I'm like, no, I get what you're saying on, like, I'm hesitant to say spiritual level, but on a sort of like a creative level, I understand what you're saying, but could I articulate that in any other way than to say, this feels like to me what the experience of reading poetry feels like for me? You want to locate the line?
Yeah, Joey, I wanted to go to the line because I wanted to recall where Isabella is when that
Mhm.
observation is being made of her. Because I think it's very important for us to remind the listeners, if they have not had an opportunity to read the story, that this is an unnamed narrator who is observing this scene and is reporting through the narrative, through their thoughts, the thoughts of this other person. And so it's a little bit of jarring. It's like, I don't know who this is. So I needed to be cemented there. She's in the garden. She's being observed outside in her garden as she was trimming various plants.
Mhm.
And for me, because of the other context, you're like, what about this sentence? I'm like, I'll get there, Joey. They compared Isabella to the wall in which these beautiful morning glory flowers, which were white and purple, were growing, and this other thing called traveler's vine or traveler's something. I have to get the right
Mhm.
word. This traveling plant.
I
And
think the Traveler's fine.
yeah. And they compared that to it's like you have all of this finery and fluffery, but do not forget there is a cold, old brick wall behind this beautiful facade. And so, what I took that to mean that she's in her garden, she's having this moment of silence that's being observed from someone else. So, again, you and I, we cannot read each other's minds. I can think I know what you're thinking, but I have no idea who you are just by looking at you. When she was talking about she had a lot of thoughts, but she was reticent to share them. For me, especially when we get to the end of the story, that I'm like, ugh, crushing. As Virginia Woolf always takes me there. You think you're great, it's all good. We're getting these nice, loving feelings. We're like interested in other human beings, things are great. And then they get to the end, and it was, oh, that was all false. Nobody is who you think they are. And there's nothing behind me at all. That to me was just reflected in that sentence of there might be a lot going on with Isabella, but she has curated her personality and her experience to never, ever reveal her secret. Because my favorite line comes in the beginning of the narrative about her secrets are locked away in these little boxes in her dresser. And if you ever had a chance to open the drawers and look through her secrets, which are written down, you would find this extremely passionate, beautiful, beautiful experience. But she's never going to tell you directly, and she's never going to let you see it. You would have to be snooping in locked drawers to get access to that part of her. So, that line that you brought to our attention
Mhm.
was a reminder of you don't know what's going on in my head, and I'm not letting you in, not an inch. Thoughts, Joey? You're like, still no.
No, and it's not. No, it's not a no. It's just interesting to me the different interpretations because I was thinking. I accept what you said. I don't know that I have a better answer, so that's why I asked. I was like, I don't. I honestly don't know. I don't know, but I think. Do you feel that way about her writing? Where you're like, some of it, I just like. It feels like I feel the meaning, which sounds so kind of douchey, but you're like, I just, like, get it. I get it, and not to be, like, an elitist, like, "Oh, if you don't get it, you don't get it," because I have on this podcast, I'm like, I don't get Virginia Woolf. To me, it's, like, on a subconscious level, thinking her words are resonating on a subconscious level.
Joey, I love that you said that because when I say that out loud to people, I'm like, oh, I get her. She is in my mind. She is in my blood. She is swimming around there. I sound like a person who has mental illness, right? But there's something about the directness and intimacy and playfulness and inventiveness of her language that, just as you said, you just kind of get it. You can't articulate it yourself while you're getting it, but I'm like, oh, I know this. And Joey, I think we didn't go far enough in the passage that you read. I would like to just read that again because it goes back to that unknowability that I love that she started us with. All of her secrets are locked away in her drawers.
Okay, after you do that, I do wanna go back to the thing you were talking about with the wall and the flowers, but
Yes, indeed. So let's just read a little bit further than the line that you
mhm,
took us to. So she stood thinking, without making any thought precise, for she
mhm.
was one of those reticent people whose minds hold their thoughts enmeshed in clouds of silence. She was filled with thoughts. Her mind was like her room, in which lights advanced and retreated, came pirouetting and stepping delicately, spread their tails, pecked their way, And then her whole being was suffused, like the room again, with a cloud of some profound knowledge, some unspoken regret, and then she was full of locked drawers stuffed with letters, like her cabinets. Virginia Woolf, you started us there. You talked about pirouettes. You talked about pecking animals. You talked about cloudy rooms feeling like emotion and was like, are you kidding me? And when Joey, when you say it is like a poem, the poet creates this mood and then they repeat the mood and then they bring the mood back. That's what poetry is to me. And it's like, that is exactly what Woolf does throughout this 6 or 7 page story. She keeps bringing us back to this moodiness, this mystery, this natural beauty, this lingering death that you know is out there, but they're trying to push away the thought of that. She says this woman is 55 or 60. That's not the bloom of the rose, right? We are
Mhm.
kind of withering on the vine at this point. And so it was so poetic to me from the larger sense that she's in her garden with a set of shears tied to her waist so she won't lose them. And she's snipping, snipping, snipping all the deadness out of her garden. And she says she has sorrow when she has to prune things because she reveres life, but she knows it needs to be done. And I just thought the practicality and the sadness and that cognitive dissonance of I'm alive, but tomorrow I'll be dead, like that moody, moody, moody Virginia Woolf ambiance is all packed in there. So, Joey, I'd love to go back to the wall and the flowers. Virginia Woolf, I just can't say enough about how she weaves these images, as you were talking about in Mrs. Dalloway. Yeah, scenes may seem jarring to people, but they'll hear a sound together, or the bell will ring, or they'll all smell the scent of roses at the same time. And then you jump from one person's experience over to the other person's experience, but they're united by a common event. And I just think that is so beautiful.
Or the skywriting. I feel like that jumps around a lot because a lot of people are witnessing that. Anyway, we're not talking about Mrs. Dalloway, although that would be fun. So I want to talk about the wall because I think we have very different interpretations of this, and I think it was interesting to hear you start to talk about that. Where, if I'm correct in interpreting your interpretation, you were making it sound like you thought that the flowers were kind of like the facade in a way of a person, and the cold, hard wall is their true self. Am I correct in that, or is that not what you're trying to say?
Sorry, Joy. I was just going to another part of the passage to
Hmm.
buttress up that point. That's partly what I'm saying. And I think what is difficult, and I feel sad, and as you said, it's like, oh, we come together to articulate our thoughts about a beautiful piece of literature. And we're both, I'll speak for myself, a little speechless to explain what it is that is so incredibly great about the story. It's like, what did
Yeah.
that mean to you? I'm going to just go back to another passage because I think we have to root ourselves in the actual text. She, being Isabella, who we are observing in the same way that this unnamed narrator is, she suggested the fantastic and the tremulous convolvulus.
Convolvulus.
Oh,
Convolvulus.
convolvulus. Okay, so that vulva is right in there. So the
Yeah.
tremulous convolvulus, which
Which
is also,
rhymes.
yes, which is also a morning glory
Hmm.
for those who might have a different name for that, rather than the upright aster, the starched zinnia, or her own burning roses alight like lamps on the straight post of their rose trees. The comparison showed how very little, after all these years, one knew about her. For it is impossible that any woman of flesh and blood, of 55 or 60, should really be a wreath or a tendril. Such comparisons are worse than idle and superficial. They are even cruel, for they come like
Convolvulus.
the convolvulus itself, trembling between one's eyes and the truth. There must be truth. There must be a wall. Yet it was strange after knowing her all these years, one could not say what the truth about Isabella was. One still made up phrases like this. She's putting that out there that that wall is her barrier. Her true self is hidden behind a wall, is
Mhm.
my feeling about this. And all of the finery around her, she said all of her clothing was exquisite, right? That was one of her things. She curated pieces from around the world to make a home of her own. They refer to her as a spinster. She never married. She had passionate affairs with tons of people, speculation, of course, but she never had a traditional marriage. And I just think there's so much loaded into this, especially since Virginia Woolf at this time is writing her essay, A Room of One's Own, right? She's like, ladies need some space. Women, we need to have some creative space. Sorry,
Mhm.
Joe, that was really convoluted, but that was my idea about the wall, that there's just something behind the puffery and the beauty that when all of that dies away in the fall, that wall is still there and you are not getting past it.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. That's definitely not the way that I interpreted it. So it's interesting, like I said, to see like what because this is so poetic. It can be not that literature normally can't, but sometimes it's like, okay, yeah, this is what that means, kind of objectively. But this is so subjective. Everyone could come up with something else. What are these flowers on this wall? And to me, because we were already introduced to Isabella, obviously not directly. Everything is in the mirror's reflection. We're never looking directly at something. Because we were introduced to Isabella already, and she is just like this iconic woman that I want to be when I grow up. She's like well traveled, she's rich, she lives alone, she has an awesome garden, obviously.
A
And
life of intrigue, Joey. She
yeah,
has
I
a whole
want that.
chest of love letters. Come
Yeah.
on.
I'm gonna get into that next. Well, whenever we're ready to move on to another topic, because I want to talk about her specifically. But anyway, so to me, the wall was sort of representing the patriarchy in this, and that the morning glories, or the now can I not pronounce it, convolvulus, were trailing up was like her way of trying to break through, because there is a mention of where the flowers are actually like breaking through the wall and working their way up.
Joey, and I appreciate that you're taking us there because morning glories, technically, I believe, are climbing vines, right? These are
Mhm.
things that are seeking the light and they do claw into the surface. So I really appreciate that you're taking that into a larger political context.
This one thing I didn't even think I was gonna say anything about. I thought it said break. It was like break through the stone or something.
I don't doubt that, Joey. I'm going to put that out there as an interpretation that I would be very excited for people to read this short story and see if that pops out for them. What did they take away from that?
It's very short, but I don't remember what words were used in that specific context in the thing that I'm thinking about. But that was my idea. Was that was what she was trying to comment on, especially if she's writing A Room of One's Own, which I have not read yet, but I do know what it's about. So that's definitely something that she would have been mulling over. She's a woman in a patriarchal society, and she's probably not having the easiest time, even coming from a family that was influential in some way. She was probably going to have a harder time than James Joyce was going to have in publishing things. I would like to talk about Isabella herself if you don't have anything else you want to talk about on that topic.
I'm sure we will circle back. Like this story, everything is related to everything else, Joey.
Yeah.
So please pivot us there and we'll take it from that spot.
No matter what we say about this story, even though I think we're good at this kind of stuff, we'll never do it justice. You just have to read it. Like don't take our word for it. Just read it, because there's no
We
way.
are butchering it, Joey, and we're doing the best eloquent job we can. It's a masterpiece of emotion, feeling, poeticness, color, light, sensation, cognitive dissonance. All the things are in there, and we're never going to explain it.
Yeah, just read it. As I was reading it, and I've read this, I don't know, four times maybe now. I was trying to think of like, well, first of all, who is Isabella? And I think there's some online discourse about it's Virginia Woolf, or Virginia Woolf is the narrator and she's looking at herself, or maybe somebody else. But anyway, there's no real proof of that in the text, so I can't say that that's true, but it's a good idea. The way that she was being described, it was almost like Isabella Tyson was a mythic character. Like she is a woman from Greek myth or whatever, take it from whatever myth canon you want, but I'll just say Greek for right now, because she just seemed literally larger than life, not physically, okay, but like she lived on this grand scale. She traveled extremely far and wide, and she collected these spoils from her travel, which kind of was like, is this colonialism? And she loved like more passionately than anybody ever did. And she had more love affairs in whatever capacity, whether that was sexual, emotional, or romantic, whatever. She had more life than the normal, everyday, average person. And her letters were not just normal letters, they encompass the full spectrum of human emotion. You could find out everything you need to know about life, not just about Isabella, but about life in general. It would literally improve your life to be able to read these letters. And so obviously, I think I'm making it a little bit more dramatic than it actually was written as, but it does seem like pretty hyperbolic. I mean, this is a fictional story. She's not talking about someone in real life, maybe. I don't know. Maybe this is someone modeled after someone. But I will just read a little bit about when we meet Isabella. Where was it? This is the problem. When you highlight everything, you're like, well, now
Relatable.
I don't know.
Relatable, Joey.
I wanted to read like the very first instance, but I guess I won't because I don't know where I put it.
Is it this? Let's see if this is where you were trying to go. For it was another fact, if
Hmm.
facts what one wanted, that Isabella had known many people, had had many friends, and thus if one had the audacity to open a drawer and read the letters, one would find the traces of many agitations, of appointments to meet, of upbraidings for not having met, long letters of intimacy and affection, violent letters of jealousy and reproach, terrible final words of parting, for all those interviews and assignations had led to nothing. That is, she had never married, and yet, judging for the mask like indifference of her face, she had gone through 20 times more of passion and experience than those whose loves were trumpeted forth for all the world to hear. Under the stress of thinking about Isabella, her room became more shadowy and symbolic. The corners seemed darker, the legs of the chairs and tables more spindly and hieroglyphic. That for me was the first time where she was put on a pedestal of experience. But if you look at her or interact with her, she's like, I have nothing to share with you. That's private.
Yeah, yeah. There's like a little bit above that on the page. I mean, literally, we should just have read this story and been like, you tell me, okay? Not that we don't know, but again, just, okay. As for facts, it was a fact that she was a spinster, that she was rich, and that she had bought this house and collected with her own hands, often in the most obscure corners of the world and at great risk from poisonous stings and oriental diseases, the rugs, the chairs, the cabinets, which now lived their nocturnal life before one's eyes. So, that, in addition to the part that you just read, we get this sense that she's a big deal. I don't know who she is. I tried to look her up. Like, is this based on someone? Because there's just this sense that she is not really, maybe not a caricature of a person, but she is the ultimate woman or person in general. She is put on this pedestal as this is the thing that you want to become. I agree. I fell for it. Or at least that's what I thought. Is like, wow, I love this lady and I want her life to be my life because I just want to live in rural England is where I'm assuming she's living. At least in my head she is. And I have this amazing garden and I just go out and I like pick fresh flowers every day and I just live my best life alone. Anyway,
With complete freedom, Joey,
yes,
right? it
yes.
is it is a non-traditional life because this was written in 1929. In the US, women got the right to vote in 1920. So like it's the flapper era, women are getting their first taste, I think, of freedom. But I was very curious that they call out the word spinster, which in my vocabulary is not a celebratory word. It is kind of
Mhm.
a dig. But I totally appreciate, Joey, like what perspective was Virginia Woolf putting out here? Is this a cautionary tale of what happens to uppity women who can't be tied down, that you're going to end up unknowable in your garden by yourself? Or is it a celebration of, oh my God, live your life in this rich experience? Do not get trapped into something. Live the fullness of yourself and love your own company. And I think this is a
Mhm.
huge question at the end of, wait a minute, what was this about again?
Yeah, and I think it's important for me to keep in mind, like, we're seeing all of this in a mirror. We're not actually looking directly at it as if we're trying to cut the head off of Medusa, kind of thing, with like Perseus, whatever. Anyway, does that mean that this is the two-dimensional Isabella and that we will never ever get to know her because we'll never see this woman as a three-dimensional human being? We're only seeing her as, I don't know how else to put it, a two-dimensional person where she's a flat character, where there is no depth to this woman. It is only on the surface. So I think for all the things that as I was reading the story, I was trying to keep that in mind in general, that this is only ever the reflection of something. And in the beginning of the story, Virginia would suggest things don't exist outside of observation. It's something again, and like I don't know that I have the ability to even explain or try and think it through. Like I feel like I need more work to explain it. But she writes, one could see a long grass path leading between banks of tall flowers until slicing off an angle, the gold rim cut it off. And she's talking about the mirror. And then she talks about a little bit later that Isabella walked too far away and she also gets cut off at the mirror. And we don't know what's happening. She's like, most likely this is what she's doing. So it made me think of that too. What is the life that we lead when we're being observed and the life that we would lead when we're in private? And you talked about this in the beginning of the internal and external worlds and how there is a separation. Of course, we have the interior of the house that acts very differently, and then the exterior of the house with like nature and all that stuff.
Jerry, I appreciate that because I was just, as you were bringing us back to that idea of walking out of the frame, of what's unknowable, of projection, I also thought about Virginia Woolf telling us that dichotomy of the aliveness of the room versus the frozen images in the mirror. So she's playing with these concepts constantly that are contradictory, right? The room is alive with sighs and breezes, and the light changes, and it feels like a moody, emotional person. And yet, seeing it through the reflected in the glass, she's like, it's cold, it's dead, it's solid, it is removed. And it
Mm.
was like, why do you always do this to us? Like, I love that she always does this to us, but it is always drawing these very stark comparisons between experience, what is real, what is not real, what can be both. Can a room be alive, but also frozen in time when you're viewing it? And it makes me also think about Virginia Woolf as a writer, right? What do writers do? They spend a lot of time observing, a lot of time projecting their feelings and their thoughts into other people or trying to divine what someone else is thinking. And for me, this really did feel like a reflection in my mind's eye of Virginia Woolf as the watcher. And when you ask, who do you think this is about? Now, I have no scholarly proof of anything, obviously, ever, but she did have a very passionate and kind of long-standing affair with Vita Sackville West. And that I think Vita had her own career, her own life. She did get married, but I think that was like a rough thing. That maybe this was based on observing a friend, or maybe a character created on someone Virginia Woolf wished she could be. Wouldn't it be great to live a life that this character that she's imagined would be?
Mhm.
Until, Joey, until we get to the end and I'm shattered. I am crushed. It's like she should have just thrown a paperweight through the mirror and shredded to 1,000 shards of glass, because that's what she
Well, that
did
would
to
have been an
me.
interesting ending.
She did that to me with her writing when
Hmm.
she was like, just kidding. She doesn't have friends. Those weren't love letters. Those were just stuffy old bills. She doesn't know herself and she's going to die alone. The end. This is why no one should have looking glasses in their house, because they don't tell the truth. That's what I took for that. I'm like, really? Couldn't you just have left us in the garden with the beautiful flowers and the smells and the sounds? No, you had to say it's all an illusion. The
I
end.
took that as like it depends on who's looking. If you're looking at someone and you're like, your life looks pretty good, and they're like, well, sorry, but you're not in my life, and so you don't know that it actually sucks. And
Yeah,
so it's
what
sort
you
of
don't
like,
know, you don't know.
yeah, it's sort of beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. That's what I took away from it. I wasn't like upset by the ending. I didn't feel like it was crushing in that way, but I see what you're saying. I kind of just felt like she was doing a fantastic job of doing everything, but in particular, explaining the experience of trying to focus on an object. And there's a point when she's talking about the letters and she's like, oh, these are marble tablets. And then she's like, oh, and I looked a little bit longer basically, and now I see that they're letters. And I was thinking, like, well, first of all, why marble tablets? And we cannot get into that now because we have already, we're gonna have to do like 3 more episodes. But I was like, oh, I think she's like, trying to explain the process in which that it takes us to literally identify something that seems very mundane. And I've done that a million times. I'm like, what the hell is that? what is that? And you're like, oh, that's just the pillow. Like the pillow is like in a weird shape right now. And that's why I can't identify immediately. And so I really love that where it's like, oh my God, my environment is so different all of a sudden because I can't identify this thing. That was how the ending felt to me is as Isabella got closer to the mirror, we got a clearer image of who she really was. And so from far away, she looked like really fantastic, but maybe this is when we get the depth of the woman is when we can see her up really close. Her life doesn't look quite as amazing as it did from far away, which I think is current for right now. When you look at people on social media and they are only posting amazing things, if you get to know that person, you're probably like, well, you're not on vacation every day of your life. You just post pictures that you're on vacation every day of your life, or something like that. Or you don't really have a private jet. You just rented the one that they use for movie sets because we're all aware that that's a thing. Virginia Woolf's way of saying, like, don't judge people from far away. Like, get to know them. And it takes time to get to know someone. Make sure that there's an effort. But I will say that in the ending line, people should not leave looking glasses hanging in their rooms. We have a repetition of the beginning. So that makes this a cyclical story. It made me think of The Library of Babel by Jorge Luis Borges, of course, my boy, because to me, Virginia Woolf's writing feels sort of like Borges in that it's immense. Like the scale of this story is immense. But of course, Borges writes about immense things like an unending library or the Aleph, where you can see the entire universe all at one time. And Virginia Woolf's writing about one room and looking in one mirror. I mean, these are very different scales.
They are different scales, but it is also the enormity of the human spirit and the human
Mhm.
psyche that is unknowable to us, to the person, and to the writer. And I just love that. And Joey, I agree with you that beautiful repetition of she starts and ends us with basically the same line. She bookends that for us. But I'd love for us to leave this conversation with not the last paragraph, because man, these paragraphs are long, but like a half of the last paragraph that leads us
Well,
up to
can
that.
before you end it, can I just say I wanted to add one more thing about comparing her to Borges. The reason why I say this feels like a huge scale, and you're correct, like this is the full breadth of the human emotion and the human experience, which is humongous. I always think like, how can I put my arms around that? I could not, you know. But the reason why I say she's like Borges in this way is that because this is a cyclical narrative, we are starting and ending the same way. So we could ideally go on for an infinite amount of time. We could just repeat this story. The mirror will always show us a reflection of somebody's life. If it's not Isabella, whoever is the next homeowner, or whoever, whatever thing, or an aliens come and invade, or whatever. We will forever and ever be stuck in this cycle of observing people in a mirror, whoever in a mirror.
And Joey, that's great because I do not recall the exact details of the two Voorhees stories that we read, but I do remember thinking he talks about larger concepts of the universe, like how physics works and that kind of thing, which is not my jam, but emotions are my jam. I recall, and you may tell me which story this is of the ones that we read, that
Mhm.
he also talks about in each of those rooms there are mirrors that are reflecting other parts of the honeycomb structure that's out there. So
Yeah,
again, that
that's a
playing
library
with
babble.
light and darkness and what is seen and what is obscured and who are those for? Like we don't know who's in there looking in those mirrors. I just thought that was really super interesting. And Joey, I agree with you. Like I wish we had 3 more hours to go through the story because it is so lush. And I don't want to say dense because dense sounds like hard. It's not hard. This is not a hard story. This is a pleasureful romp in a field with wildflowers in your hair, dreaming about your ideal life. Like, this is just so good. Until, dun, 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 until this moment. And then I'm so over it. At last, there she was in the hall, she being Isabella. She stopped dead. She stood by the table. She stood perfectly still. At once, the looking glass began to pour over her a light that seemed to fix her, that seemed like some acid to bite off the unessential and superficial and to leave only the truth. It was an enthralling spectacle. Everything dropped from her: clouds, dress, basket, diamond, all that one had called the creeper and the morning glory. Here was the hard wall beneath. Here was the woman herself. She stood naked in that pitiless light, and there was nothing. Isabella was perfectly empty. She had no thoughts. She had no friends. She cared for nobody. As for her letters, they were all bills. Look, as she stood there, old and angular, veined and lined, with her high nose and her wrinkled neck, she did not even trouble to open them. People should not leave looking glasses hanging in their rooms. Maybe she meant after 50. I don't know. That was the annotation that got put on my copy. I don't know, but that was just so harsh and so sad. And I'm like, did you have to leave me here, Virginia?
Yeah.
Did you have to?
That's funny. Don't leave mirrors in your room after 50.
After
No, you
50,
should. I
life advice.
love I love stories and I'll forever be drawn to them and shows and movies when the protagonist is older. And I'm not saying that 50's old or 60's old, but I'm saying like anything that's not a teenager or in their 20s. I can't relate, sorry. But I do love it when especially in like an older woman, I'm like, yes, I want to know this. I want to be friends with them.
Awesome, Joey. There's room
Yeah.
at the party for you. You are welcome. You are welcome at this
Oh,
party.
good.
Wonderful. Speaking of older women with lots of wisdom to share, our next conversation is about my friend Margaret Atwood. So I'm
Yes.
very much looking forward to that. We're going to talk about
What?
Margaret Atwood, and I think that is going to be a very similar conversation about the beauty of elegant writing. And it's a more contemporary person, but that spirit of creativity, of really diving into emotion, very keen observation, and really poetic and beautiful language. Nailed it. So, Joey, I am really excited that next week we are going to be talking about Margaret Atwood's story, another amazing female writer who really has a beautiful collection of work, short stories, poetry, novels, all of it. And we will be reading Happy Endings. So maybe I'll finally get my happy ending instead of this tragedy that befell me in this in this story of Virginia Woolf. But I've spent enough
Mhm.
time with my friend Margaret Atwood that she's going to pull the rug out from under me. So she says it's called Happy Endings, but I have my doubts. I have my doubts, Joey.
We'll see. I haven't read it yet.
Awesome. Me neither. Okay. See you next week. Thank you for listening to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And don't worry, it'll be our little secret if you stepped out of your literary comfort zone. Looking for more ways to connect with us? Check out our link tree to follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Storygraph. And for the really lit curious, check out our website at extraliteraryAffairs.com.